a lot of veterans will likely want to know what's going on, especially with their government, especially with the Canadian Armed Forces, and especially if they're committing, I have to say, alleged crimes, like straight up crimes. Last time we talked about the spy plane. For somebody that doesn't know what the spy plane is, what is this plane that we're talking about here?
It's a King, I believe it's called a King Air signals intelligence collection device that has wings and propellers, basically. So this thing flies over an area, scrapes the ground of all signals sending devices. So think about anything you have that's connected to the internet that can send or receive data, whether it's a computer, phone, tablet.
What did you start seeing that kind of threw up some alarm bells during this particular protest?
It started at the very end of January and took place for about 2.5 weeks into mid-February before they called in the Gestapo to come and stomp out a bunch of people serving hot dogs next to Bouncy Castle. Not long after I had visited, and I can't remember the exact time frame with which this happened, but I did receive a call from a colleague who informed me that my name had come up in a meeting amongst the intelligence apparatus, that I was at the demonstration. I was at the protest. I had been seen there. My name was mentioned. Captain Isted, part of the convoy or whatever capacity. And this person said to me, I'm not going to mention, like, please don't repeat this. Like, I never told you this. How the fuck did they know I was there? I reached out through Access to Information and asked for information regarding CF InstaIU's involvement within the convoy in terms of operations that they had on the ground in case there was any human assets. I want to know how that happened. I want to know why it happened. And I also want to know why and who authorized the 5 flights of this spy plane over top of the convoy.
Hey folks, I already fucked up the intro. Oh shit. Great start, Dave. Great start.
You should leave that in. I like that stuff. People laugh at that. I think it's funny.
I know. We're sitting down with Brian. Hey, Brian. Thanks for coming and chatting on the podcast. You obviously hit my radar when you were a guest on the Cleared Hot podcast. So folks, go back. I'll put a link here for that because it gives a little bit more context as to where Brian is coming from. But you've got an axe to grind, and I love getting folks on the podcast that have an axe to grind because there's not many outlets out there to do it. And I think we're pretty much aligned on the fact that there's people that are doing some sketchy stuff and they need to be held accountable. And if we can start the ball rolling on a platform like this, then more power to us. So let's start there, Brian. What brought you to this point where I don't want to call you an activist, maybe a truth seeker, but you're looking to make right a wrong that you perceive. So let's start getting into that. Like, what's brought you here, and then let's get into your story.
Yeah, activism. I don't know, but
I know it's a big word. I know. I wouldn't want to be called an activist either.
Yeah, I think it's got some negative connotations with it from the last decade or so. But it's not even necessarily righting or wrong. Like, no one's made more mistakes in their life or their career or their just general overall human existence than I have, and I feel like I do a pretty good job at owning them and admitting them and trying to correct them retroactively, hopefully proactively moving forward. But what I saw and what I continue to see every day with some press release, some media release, whatever, is that these aren't mistakes that are being made that are just, oh, okay, we pivot, we zigged when we should have zagged. It's people are actively doing things incorrectly and then taking zero ownership of it, and then using every conceivable method or tactic to cover it up and obfuscate the fact that it's happened, while gaslighting you to either tell you that this was always the way it was going to be or that it never happened at all.
Hey there, Hard to Kill listeners. Today's episode is brought to you by Natesto. Did you know that only 5% of men get treated for low testosterone? Low testosterone is a serious health concern that is rarely discussed, especially in the veteran community. Toxic exposure, mild traumatic brain injuries, and terrible sleep habits can all contribute to a rock bottom total T-score. I want to help improve the health and fitness of the veteran community, and that's why I've partnered with Natesto. Talk to your doctor today and see if Natesto is the right solution for you. Let me fill you in, folks. I've written a new book. It's called Harden the Up. The book is 19 chapters of the best actionable intel on how to get yourself fit, healthy, and moving in the right direction to make yourself harder to kill. I get it. You might be on the fence. Why should I buy another book written by a veteran? Well, I'll tell you why. You want to be cool, right? Well, you're going to want to be like all the cool kids that are saying some really cool things about this book, like Dallas Alexander. He's pretty cool. General Thompson, former task force commander at Kandahar. Tony Chapman, Dr. Elliot Justin. Who else? Oh, Tim Jensen of Grunt Style. Not only did he think the book was cool, he thought it was so cool, he wrote the freaking foreword to the book. Ebook and audiobook drop on the 28th of November. On the 29th, you can get your paperback copy at Amazon. Be one of the first to get your hands on a copy of this amazing book and become harder to kill. Peace. So just to clarify and interrupt you there, for those folks that maybe aren't Canadian, we're talking about Canadian issues right now. And specifically, Brian, you were a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and this all boils down to essentially the era of the COVID mandates and the fallout thereof. So that's just to put it into a little bit more context as to where we're going with this whole conversation.
That's fair. So I'll backtrack a little bit, and I'll give a 30-second one paragraph. So I joined the military in 2013 as an infantry officer reservist. Went Reg Force infantry officer for a year. Realized that was not necessarily the career move for me, considering the aspirations I had. I pivoted to military police officer. By 2017, did a tour in Iraq as a close protection team leader in 2018. Ended up at Dwyer Hill, passing my second selection attempt by 2021. Was unsuccessful through SOAC, which is the 13-month course of training. Saw some significant health problems immediately after being vaccinated. And then just the ball just went straight downhill for my career in terms of being medically released within less than just over 2 years of getting all the medical stuff documented for them trying to figure out what's going on with me. And then that's when I started to realize that all the things that I had somewhat, and I'll own this part, cowardly turned myself away from acknowledging or at least speaking out against. I feel like now that I have the luxury of time and space, this stuff does need to be addressed. And there's an insanely long list of things that I saw personally, was confided in by people so I have it secondhand from someone who saw it, or things that just don't add up at all that really still need to be addressed. That hopefully this isn't too much sort of nauseating, redundancy here, but I do want to talk about it, and I will address things that I did talk about on Andy's show. So forgive me if you've already seen that. I just want to paint a picture for people that might not have.
Yeah. Andy's show is it's a great show, period. And on top of that, he definitely seems surprised at some of the things that you were discussing. So let's start there. What are the main things that are causing you some concern, and the reasons why you want to discuss them here?
So I want to quickly go back to the chronology of events beginning in 2019. As I mentioned, I was a military police officer working as an intelligence analyst with a specialization in cyber. So I was looking at all things related to cyber, whether it was terrorism, organized crime, crypto. That was sort of my bailiwick, and how it can be relevant to Canada and the allies, essentially the Five Eyes and NATO. So I kind of hit the ground running on a treadmill of sprinting, figuring out with no intelligence training whatsoever, just trying to recognize patterns and download all the info, to my brain, reading 8 hours a day with a break for the gym in there, obviously. So I'm not doing that all day, but it was a lot of reading. There was a very high expectation of intelligence products to be contributed, not necessarily by me as a junior guy, but some of the folks I worked with were just absolutely brilliant. Men and women, civies, military folks across the board, just people that were very good at their job, very good at analyzing information. It was a privilege to work around these people. Just their ability to produce very interesting products on almost a daily basis. And then the longer, like much more thorough products would be released every few weeks or months. I was just blown away by how good these people were at their job. And I was very privileged position to be working alongside them. So the learning was on kind of, like I said, a treadmill on sprints. So 2019 fall, there is the World Military Games in Wuhan, China, where a bunch of Canadian soldiers and strap hangers and sort of enablers that went along that trip. I'm guessing we had dozens of folks. I don't know the exact number, but I'm guessing dozens of people flew out there, athletes and enablers. Some of them came back so sick in late October that they had to be quarantined on their flights back. And this can all be, feel free to fact check and look this up, whoever's watching. Like, this is all open source stuff. It's readily available. So there's a very strong theory as the intelligence community, as of the fall of 2019, so I'm talking October, November, grayish, somewhere in there, something was already going on in Wuhan in the fall of 2019. So this is an important date because I'm going to come back to this later. Something's going on there. People are coming back sick. The intelligence community gets wind of something going on in Wuhan by, I want to say, November, December timeframe for sure. There was rumblings going on that I was hearing. It wasn't within my immediate sort of arc of fire, so I was not paying that close of attention to it. It didn't seem like it was a big deal, but people were talking about it. Come January, everybody's talking about it. Everybody knows what's going on. At least they have an idea that something terrible is going on in Wuhan, specifically in China, that there's this virus outbreak, pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. The rest you guys have already know. So by the time I think mid-March was the lockdown, January, February, March.
Yep.
So in theory, if you guys want to get on board with me and just humor me for a second, this thing was probably circulating for a good 5 or 6 months before we started a lockdown. So I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I would think if there's an extraordinarily dangerous and virulent pandemic for 6 months straight before they started canceling flights, this thing has already made its way around.
Too late. 100%.
Like, it's way too late. So now we lock down. Everybody knows what happened there. But I want to give the context and perspective of what I saw early in the lockdowns. Like, and I also want to give the benefit of the doubt to the leadership at the time, because I understand that the consequences of underreacting would have been potentially much more severe than the overreaction that we ended up doing. So I even empathize and understand why the leadership made some of the choices that they did, because yes, they were tracking it. Yes, they were aware of it, but nobody kind of really knew 100% or even 90+% solution of how this was going to shake out. So I kind of get it. And I'm willing to take a knee on the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, because if that's all it had been, I think that would have been relatively okay. And I don't think that I haven't really met anyone who would say that was like a complete flinch from the start. But why I think it's crazy is because as we got into February, March, April, and we're at a skeleton crew at work, and I'm sitting in meetings that I definitely do not normally sit on because I'm sort of the acting team lead. Mm-hmm. As we're down to a skeleton crew of people because we're all going to die from COVID. And it's so dangerous to go to work, and it's so dangerous to be less than 10 feet from the next person. And we all had the spaced out desks and all the nonsense that you guys all remember. I'm sitting in meetings listening to high ranking individuals, civies and military personnel alike. I kind of want to be careful about how I say this, but basically relaying information that you could have read in the newspaper. So policy influencing people of very high rank civies and military were being briefed on information that you could have easily found on Google. You could have easily read in a newspaper, and it was all inflammatory, almost entirely inflammatory. It was the same narrative over and over. Hospitals are overrun. They're going to be more overrun. Everyone's going to die. We're all going to, you know what I mean? 2 weeks to flatten the curve, has to be 4 weeks, has to be 4 months, has to be 4 years. Like the absolute hysteria that I was seeing broadcast from senior people to even more senior people while I sat there and just kept my mouth shut. Again, cowardly. And I look back on this and feel kind of sick that I didn't question more. I did privately, but not in front of a group of people that I really had no business opening my mouth in front of, because I understand my position. But there was never going to be an attempt to pivot. Once this ball was started rolling, Dave, no one was going to change the mind of these people. It was going to be locked down forever, or as long as we need to. Quebec's under a curfew. I can't cross the border to see my girlfriend at the time without showing my military ID to a police officer so I can cross the border, because if I cross the border, I'm going to die from like all this. Again, I don't want to be too redundant here with the stuff everybody's already sick of hearing, but like these folks at very senior levels had no intentions of using common sense or critical thinking. It was just, get this narrative out there, push it as hard as you can, and we're going to play along with whatever Trudeau and the clowns decide is enough fear mongering to push whatever the next thing is coming. So that was something that the intelligence community was tracking and doing very early on in COVID. Like I'm talking February, March, April. And if you want to read Dr. Tom Wood's book and go back and look at how early the data was available to figure out what was actually going on, I'm talking April, May, June, July timeframe. I left that seat in July, so I can't speak for what went on in there after that. But there was a lot of information pretty early on that was contrary to what we were being told. And what made me absolutely disgusted was how the senior leadership came down and said, whatever you guys are working on in your files, stop doing that and work on COVID, because this is the appetite that we have now for intelligence. Like we need to get a handle on this. We need to figure out what's going on. So put on pause whatever you're working on, work on COVID, however it relates to like I was literally reading about how COVID was affecting Al-Qaeda and, you know what I mean, the Taliban in caves hiding. Like seriously, there was reporting about how this was going on. And I hope I can say that. I hope that's vague enough I can say that. But like it was just insane. So we spent hours and hours a day for weeks and months on end reading in the newspaper, reading reporting, open source, level 3, level 2, whatever you want to, whatever we had access to. And it was pretty obvious pretty early on that this was not what we were told it was. It was not what we were, and in hindsight, obviously most people understand and know that now. But we also knew that in 2020, Dave, like we saw that, we knew that. I had in confidence conversations with, again, very smart people, much smarter than me, better at their job, very adept at analyzing information and providing a insightful analysis. And I was asking them sort of off the record, hanging out with them outside of work, at work, whatever, saying, what is going on here? Why are we doing this? You know what I mean? And then saying, oh, it's a total overreaction. This is crazy. We don't need to be doing this. And I'm just thinking, what? You know what I mean? It's right. Mind bending to talk to someone who's a senior person who understands what's happening here and kind of sees through the bullshit. But it just, there's no chance that this is going to change. Like this, once this train left the station, nothing was stopping it. And it was very, very crazy for a number of months to watch this happen. And here's another thing that I want to say before I forget. In Ottawa specifically, where I was working at 101, the old NDHQ, so many people benefited from not going to work that they definitely didn't want to alter or have anything to do with interrupting this narrative, because they were immediately granted weeks off, months off, zero accountability, zero expectation of showing up to work. Here I am, and I'll toot my own horn here for a second, asking to come in more often. I wanted more work. I wanted more responsibility. I wanted access to the gym. I wanted, like, I was showing up looking for work because I just wanted to be productive. You know what I mean? I wanted to be involved. And I'm being told, pump the brakes. We have a skeleton crew. It's too dangerous. And I'm like, the whole thing was just cringy and pathetic in terms of the risk aversion strategy that they took. And I think in part, at least, if not significantly, due to how many people this benefited. This benefited people getting months off without having to do anything, especially if you worked in a level 3 environment where you can't do anything if you're not at work.
Yeah.
You can do intelligence analysis on the open source, which in fairness, a lot of information does come from there and it's relatively reliable if you know where to look. But people, they just wanted to not go to work. And that's honestly, Dave, like a significant portion, in my opinion, of what led to people not fighting back harder for what was going on. And it was so pathetic.
That was going to be my question. Why do you think this took root so fast? But I think this is unfortunate. And I say unfortunately, because sometimes when bad shit happens, I want there to be some like deep, dark conspiracy, because then it's like, all right, now that makes sense. Like there's some evilness going on here. But ultimately, it's just people wanting to chill out at home with their kids and get paid. That is like a sickening feeling, because it's for nothing. It's only for just frivolous personal
It's for
gain.
a bad flu.
Right. And, when you said you want to go into work, you wanted to go to the gym, I'm sure you weren't thinking, I'm being courageous. But
no, not at all, because I knew there was no risk.
There's no, right. But for an organization like, let's say, the Canadian Armed Forces in general, our job is reliant on being courageous. And I think we missed the point a lot. The whole point of this whole organization is to go fight a war. War is also based on courage. You need to show that at all times, in my opinion. And for a guy like myself, a guy like you, we're young guys. Within a week, I realized, wait, there's no bodies, man. Like, this isn't like digging trenches and like throwing lye on people and stacking bodies and kids. And like, I was like, oh shit, if this is it, man, this is going to be bad. And as soon as I realized that I'm okay, I was like, hey, what can I do to help? Like, my general inclination is go help and be of service. And I think a lot of us are the same, but it's like the message was, no, sit at home and don't do anything. That's so antithetical to what we're used to doing. We're used to taking risk and taking the brunt of whatever risk that is. So to say, no, you need to stay home was really hard, I think, on a lot of folks. And it seemed like it was hard on you too. And I was working at D&D at the time. So I was at home. I was working at the transition center, or the transition group. Sorry, we're helping stand that up. And I was just completely blown. I never stepped foot in the office in Ottawa. Everything was remote. No work was getting done. And it made me really worried about like where we're going with things, because it didn't make sense. And then ultimately what it led to was I lost my position, because they were like, oh, by the way, I know you work at home like every day, but you need to prove that you're vaccinated. And so, well, I don't work with anybody. I'm in my basement and I have a little office. What are you talking about? Well, you need to sign an affidavit and send it into the government. I'm like, well, I fundamentally disagree with this, and I'm not going to do that. They said, well, we can put you on extended leave. I go, well, yeah, but that's not going to work. I need to make money. So, yeah, I just bounced. And so that being said, let's just assume like one of the main reasons why this continued for so long was just based off of individuals in bureaucratic positions that had, the pull to just say, no, we're not going to say anything because this is a good go.
I think that was a lot of it. What
led to, if we can move on a little bit further, to the next phase, which were mandates and abuse of power? Because let's just say there's people that wanted to stay home and be like, oh, okay. But then you start instituting mandates and stuff like that. That's a whole other level. What started happening from your end on like you're in the intelligence side up until July. Like, what's your take on that? Because it's interesting.
On the mandates?
Yeah, and like, why did you think why do we go down into that? Because that's ultimately what led to you being released, right? Like, there's a big component there.
In one way or another, essentially, yeah. With the health problems I started getting, so good question. So the mandates didn't. So I left in July of 2020 from intelligence, and I went to a staff role where I pushed papers around and was trying to spend money to acquire weapons and armor and peripherals for things that the military police group was rolling out. I was not I was not really good at this job. As the staff work level required, I think a major had been in there before me, and I was a relatively junior captain, so I was keeping up, but I wasn't shining by any stretch in this new role. So I was just trying to keep up with the demands of the admin, while people were just not answering emails, not showing up to the office at all, being, again, like I said, absent for significant periods with no consequence or transparency on what they were doing. And I'm a junior captain in a world of mostly majors and above people I'm reaching out to on behalf of the chief of staff where I was working. So people just either straight up ignored me or just took their time getting back to me. So it was pretty frustrating. But the mandates didn't come in until the summer of 2021 for D&D folks. So now, again, like I mentioned, I did mention the timeline of 2019. So these mandates came out officially by the fall of 2021, but it was a requirement for me to be double vaccinated to go on SOAC, which I had been trying to avoid the vaccine up until then because, again, I didn't think I needed it. I wasn't telling people not to get it by any stretch. I wasn't an anti-vaxxer that I would have been labeled as for just saying that I don't think I need this. I've taken dozens of vaccines over the course of my life. I think I took at least 6 or 8 a couple weeks before I went to Iraq. It was part of the dagging process. So I had no reason to think that other vaccines in general were unsafe. I never really looked into any of that stuff. I was too busy doing my own thing. I'm digressing here, but the mandates came down roughly between the summer and the fall when they really started cracking down and trying to kick people out. But the timeline's important. So between October 2019 and roughly the summer fall of 2021 is about 2 years of this thing circulating with almost no vaccine immunity widespread. Like it was available to, I think, like nurses and frontline people, I think as early as like January, February, March of 2021. So some people were already getting it, but by no means was this thing widely distributed to the point of it was going to give us enough immunity to escape this thing after already over a year in circulation, probably. So why now at almost 2 years of circulation and herd immunity, which I think just saying herd immunity 4 years ago would have got you kicked off platforms. 100%. Why now all of a sudden is it so important that young, fit people be vaccinated for something that's been in the system for 2 years? The whole thing just seems like a complete cop-out on the behalf of the sitting senior generals that approved this. We know of the story of, and I think you probably know a bit more than me about this, because at the time, again, I was on course and I didn't even know what was going on in the background of all the people that were being canceled, all the generals that were being accused of things. I had almost no fidelity of that as I was laser focused on really challenging training and just trying to survive and thrive in a very demanding environment. But the people that did end up sticking around and passing this mandate through seemed like just a sycophant, pathetic, cowardly attempt to cozy up to the people that were in power at the time. I can't think of another reason why this policy would have been executed so late into a so-called pandemic. I just can't wrap my mind around 2 years later. It's now vitally important that all the young and fit people who've probably already had COVID or stand a significantly high chance of surviving, if even noticing you have it, now all need to be vaccinated. So, like I said before, I tucked my tail between my legs and I went and got my first shot right before I started training. About three or so weeks into training, 4 weeks into training, I got my second shot and my health just immediately deteriorated, especially after the second shot, which eventually led to my medical release. But the whole thing that I want to stress here again is 2 years later, it's now so important that we do this. And I think it's nothing less than just pandering. It's people who wanted to solidify their relationship with the Trudeau government. And we all know about the dozens of corruption scandals that come up almost daily at this point between people funneling money to someone, their friend or whoever. And I think this is all this was. I think this was somebody trying to solidify themselves in history as virtue signaling, doing the right thing alongside a prime minister who does nothing but virtue signaling?
Well, I mean, we cover this off with Catherine as well, and it's easy enough to find the briefing notes that the CAF presented to General Air, and the first one said, "Don't do it. We have over 90% coverage already. It would be a disaster in terms of human rights, and on top of it, there's no precedent to do something like this because the issues that would arise would be far greater than the benefits." So the initial decision was don't do it. And then it came around again. And then Air's decision was different. And he flipped. And the only thing that we can come up with is that it was based off promotion. And if that's the case, that really sucks because you put a lot of guys and gals into harm's way for absolutely no reason. Like you said, it's been circulating for 2 years, and the CAF was already voluntarily uptaking this on their own. So that's my take on it. I think you're right. It's just, hey, how do I cozy up to the party? And it was already shown that this was a human rights abuse. So, okay, so we have our proof. Like this isn't conjecture here. Like we have the evidence, and then there's lawsuits and everything going on now. So we've got to the point where there's a mandate, but then we all start pushing back in terms of, I mean civilians here. We're getting fed up.
People with critical thinking skills, I think, is what you mean.
Yeah, right, exactly. And the Trucker Convoy starts. And this is where I want to kind of dig in a little bit with you. Like, you're in this, this world, right? Like, a lot more than I do and a lot of other folks. What did you start seeing that kind of threw up some alarm bells during this particular protest?
Are you talking February or January, February 2022?
Yeah, that was that January, February 2022? Yeah.
It started at the very end of January and took place for about 2.5 weeks into mid-February before they called in the Gestapo to come and stomp out a bunch of people at serving hot dogs next to bouncy castles as it was a threat to democracy or whatever pathetic media release that they had about it. But yeah, I was living in Ottawa still. I'm in Toronto now, but I was in Ottawa at the time. And I did go to the convoy. I think it was the first week or so of it. It was frigid cold. It was probably close to minus 15, 20, something like that at night. And I went to go see it. Like, I wanted to see what all the hype was about. Was this full of a bunch of Nazi flag waving, you know what I mean, redneck lunatics who are trying to retake Canada for some, you know what I mean, Ubermensch vision, like that we were being told? And it was nothing like that. It was nothing like that at all. It was a lot of families, a lot of young children up past probably their bedtime by the time that I was there. People of all sizes and shapes and colors and ethnicities. And it seemed like it crossed even political boundaries to some degree. I don't expect that every single person there was a hardcore PPC or conservative voter. Like, I think it was just people who were sick of what was going on. And the crazy part about my presence there for maybe an hour or two, one night of it, was that not long after I had visited, and I can't remember the exact time frame with which this happened, but I did receive a call from a colleague who informed me that my name had come up in a meeting amongst the intelligence apparatus, that I was at the demonstration. I was at the protest. I had been seen there. My name was mentioned. Captain Isted, part of the convoy or whatever capacity. And this person said to me, I'm not going to mention, like, please don't repeat this. Like, I never told you this. But unfortunately, I am repeating it, protecting the identity of this person. But how the fuck did they know I was there is what I would like to know. Like, were they conducting counterintelligence operations on the ground using human to identify people? It's not like I really blend in a crowd. I'm bigger than most people, and D&D represents, you know what I mean, half of Ottawa, so it's not that hard to recognize people. But like, what the fuck were they doing? Sending people around, recognizing faces. I used to live right next to where the protest was happening. For all they knew, I was walking home back to my house that I used to live in, and the old apartment that I had that was in the market. So this gave me a significant level of disgust and distrust of the actions of D&D. And it wasn't until much later, into 2023, I believe, that I found out about the planes, but we'll get to that in a bit. But this protest, as everybody knows now with the benefit of hindsight, was nothing more than the vast majority of people showing up there to ask for an end to this lunacy, the lockdowns, the vaccine passports, the ArriveCan scam, like all the things that we were subjected to. Ottawa was just completely locked down for so many months and years. And these people were just done. And that's all that was. Was there a few people who drank too much and probably acted like an idiot and broke bottles or took a leak on a building or something? Like probably, like for sure that happened. But you should deal with those people individually and not paint the whole organization or protest because some people can't handle their liquor, or they decided they were going to use it as a megaphone to spread whatever else. But that's not what people were doing there for the most part. And I saw it for myself, and I can attest to that.
Yeah. Same here. Politically, I saw a lot of folks that were, I would argue, likely liberal, but not not with the party, but like fundamentally, because they were coming out with they were with children, like they were saying, "My body, my choice." Well, yeah, that's a very legitimate argument, and if you're staying logically consistent, you gotta apply it the same. But and also the other thing I saw too was the first time in my life I've ever seen Quebecers and Albertans hanging out. That was insane. I was like, oh, this is
That's
uniting
when you know
people.
It's gone weird.
It's getting like separatists from Alberta and Quebec kind of like, maybe hanging out. That is like nightmare situation for the
Quebec
government,
was living
right?
in a fucking... Sorry, can I swear on here? Quebec was living in a gulag.
I know.
Quebec,
this is where I am.
Quebec was under a curfew.
It was insane.
The longest time, because that after 10 o'clock, COVID explodes. Like all this, like, again, I don't want to get into stuff that everybody's kind of sick of hearing about, but people that were living under this regime for this long were just so sick of it.
Yeah.
And
precisely.
with my benefit of hindsight, I've had the opportunity, because of how many medical specialists and appointments I've been to in the last 2 years, I've had the chance to talk to folks who were at the front lines of everything in the most aggressive, during the most aggressive portions of the outbreak. I had an infectious disease specialist here in Ontario, close to me now, confide in me that he'd received death threats because he was recommending that we pivot from the strategy of locking everything down because there's no other way out of this. He was working at the busiest hospital in Canada during the height of the outbreak, and there was never bed shortages. This is coming from him. Like, this isn't my opinion. This is coming from the guy who's the top infectious disease doctor in Canada, arguably, telling me that, yes, certain rooms were overrun in the GTA because of how the population density here. So what they did was they just farmed them out to hospitals nearby in Durham or Halton regions, you know what I mean? To other, like, send them off to Hamilton, send them off to Burlington or whatever. And then that freed up space. And there was never this crazy panic, everything's overrun. That never happened. That was not true. That's more gaslighting to justify the narrative. And this isn't coming from me. This is coming from people who ask me not even to repeat their name because they've received already death threats for saying what they saw in real life. And this is so unbelievably insane that this happened for so long, and that we're all just going like, okay, like, we did our best, you know what I mean? But that they didn't do their best. And I know for a fact they didn't do their best because I watched them all pathetically just fall in line and then refuse to admit that anything they ever did was the wrong thing or exaggerated. And it's, man, like, I still lose sleep over this. It's so unbelievably pathetic.
Yeah. You mentioned surveillance. That scares the shit out of me. What do you mean by that in terms of later on you found out that there was surveillance going on at the Trucker Convoy?
So I think this was, I can't remember exactly when I found this out. Someone either sent me a link or a group chat or something, because this is, again, open source stuff that I could have easily learned at the time, almost immediately after it happened. But for whatever reason, I didn't, or I wasn't aware of it. But a King Air flew 5 times over the convoy with the location transponder turned off before February 14th. So that's an important distinction, because February 14th was when they declared the emergency state, or whatever, state of emergency in Ontario and Canada, where now they could use essentially martial law to extend their Gestapo regime to continue, you know what I mean, just enforcing these ridiculous policies. But 5 times a spy plane from CanSoftCom flew over top of the convoy with its location transponder turned off. So what does that mean? So again, I have a background of cyber a little bit. By no stretch am I a cyber expert, but I understand how these things work at sort of a 35,000 foot level, pardon the pun. But this plane is capable of using very sophisticated signals interception equipment with I'm guessing the assistance of a comms researcher on board, at least one, if not a signaler or whoever they need to sort of enable this machine to do what it does. But you fly this plane over an area, and what it does is it pings cell phones on the ground. It acts as kind of a cell phone tower, just scraping data. So if you were in the area of the convoy, whatever sort of geofencing they decided they were going to use to pinpoint people having taken part of it or being in the area of it, it pinged your phone. So what does that mean? So that means that it knows your number, it knows your name, it has all the information from your phone that it deems that it's relevant, you know what I mean, to be scraping. So I'm talking photos, conversations, banking information, passwords. I don't know how far this or deep this goes. I wasn't on the plane operating this machine, but I know how these things work. And they use these in theaters of war to find and pin and I'm looking for the military word here, but locate the terrorists or people of interest so that they can spy on them. So what is required in Canada to scrape data on someone's phone is a warrant.
Right.
So you can't just arbitrarily decide that I'm going to go to the Sky Dome for a Jays game and I'm going to set up a tower and I'm going to ping everybody's phone here and get all their information in hopes of catching the bank robbers or the child molesters. You know what I mean? You can't do that. That's not a thing in Canada. You need warrants to go after specific people of interest that are under investigation if you want to search through their devices. That's just the privacy laws that protect people in Canada. That's how that works. The interesting thing here is that, okay, so maybe the military used it only to investigate military people. Maybe, but I don't see how that plane would be able to make a distinction between who's military and who's civilian by pinging the phones on the ground. They don't know who's down there until they ping the phone and get the information back. So realistically, is this how they found out I was there? I think probably that's what happened. They could have used human assets on the ground. That's also equally as probable in my opinion, but I think at least 50-50 this plane identified folks on the ground. And what I would like to know is who authorized this to happen? And even more than that, I would like to know who is this pilot? Who is this comms researcher operating this equipment? And why, after 2 years, have you said nothing? Why, after 2 years of doing this illegal search and seizure of people's information and data, has there been zero consequence to this? Why are people not realizing that the federal government of Canada reached down through the brass, the MND, and then down the chain probably, I don't know, this is my estimation, that this was authorized through several senior people within CanSoftCom, within 427, and who knows how else. I'm guessing it was fairly pigeonholed to keep this pretty tight-lipped. But at least a handful of people know what happened there. And this is a pretty significant breach among all the other breaches we'd already experienced since 2020. This is kind of what should have been the nail in the coffin of senior people authorizing this. Mm-hmm. You cannot search people arbitrarily at random, harvesting their data in order to paint some picture of whatever you think is happening on the ground and then using that information against them later at work as leverage for whatever reason my name came up in a meeting. It's just, I really would like some fidelity on this. I'm really asking for anybody that was involved in this operation, this training mission, as we were told it was from the PAOs in Ottawa. I would like to know what actually happened there, because what I'm doing now is conjecture. What I'm doing now is sort of estimating based on things that I know and understanding of how this technology works. I would like to know if what I'm saying is out to lunch or if there is some or any truth to it. And I'm pleading for someone to come forward and essentially become a whistleblower on what they saw and what they know, because this was 100% illegal. And this should be enough to start trimming some of the people that were involved.
Okay. Two things. There's, for folks that are curious, right? There is an article, right, that was written about this in the Ottawa Citizen, I believe.
Oh, there was a ton of articles written. Yeah.
Okay. So this isn't just like, yeah. So just to make clear that this isn't something that is like just based off of what you believe happened. Like there's clearly
readily available
evidence that you can go reference.
So that's even acknowledged it and said it was a training mission.
Right. But the second thing, this is the bombshell part. The Canadian Armed Forces then was conducting seizure, like you want to call them search and seizure operations against its own citizens.
Yep.
They do not have any authority to do anything against its own citizens, point blank. This wasn't a police operation. So if this is true...
Yeah, it's not law enforcement.
It's not
which
law
operates
enforcement.
under a different area. And they also are not allowed to do that arbitrarily, by the way.
Right. So now we get into danger zone, because what does this actually mean? If the Canadian Armed Forces can arbitrarily do search and seizures against its own population, what else can it do if it's not going to get punished? At the behest of
whom also? Who's asking for this?
Exactly. And for what reason?
Exactly.
These are huge. This is a really big bomb being dropped here, Brian. Like, I just had this conversation with a buddy of mine. We're serious people. Like you, me, and my buddy, right? We did a serious job. But it seems like everything around us isn't serious enough to take things like this seriously. And for me, that creates a lot of, if you want to call it, anxiety. I don't like knowing that this isn't being thoroughly investigated so that it doesn't happen again. Because this is underpinnings of our democracy type shit right now.
Not only is it not being investigated seriously, it's as far as I know, it's not being investigated at all. Because as soon as DND released, oh yeah, of course that was the plane, because some savvy civilian was able to follow the signals from these planes traveling from Petawawa to Ottawa, flying directly over the convoy. What a coincidence that was a training operation that happened 5 times in a row with the location transponder turned off. So whoever these savvy folks are who figured this out, good on you. And you deserve some kind of meritorious civilian service award for doing this. But the second portion to this, Dave, is that once I found this information out and was basically sickened to my stomach, having been a part of that world and then being a target of their investigations, or at least their spying, I initiated some ATIPs. So through access to information laws in Canada, you can request documentation of events that take place within the federal government. You're a taxpayer, you deserve to know what's going on, so you can ask for information. If you want to have some transparency on some event or some meeting or some operation or whatever, as long as it doesn't violate national security and doesn't represent sort of immediate harm to operational security, they are to release that information to you, redacted as much as necessary. So for the $5 each cost, I reached out through access to information and asked for information regarding CF-NCIU's involvement within the convoy in terms of operations that they had on the ground in case there was any human assets. I want to know how that happened. I want to know why it happened, at least, you know what I mean, through the broad lens of redacted as much as necessary, but I'm interested to know what you were doing there. And I also want to know why and who authorized the 5 flights of this spy plane over top of the convoy. And I initiated 2 ATIPs specifically asking for this. This was in October of 2023 that these ATIPs went in. There is a mandate, or at least some kind of policy, that these ATIPs be responded to in 30 days. This may shock you, Dave, but I've yet to receive a response that represents anything even coherent of any information regarding either of these events. And I'm nearly certain that this information is being blocked by somebody within the federal government and or DND to not provide this information, because they did respond to one of the ATIPs with something resembling communications from the RCMP that they had with amongst each other and local law enforcement about the risk of extremist violence, terrorist
ideologically
actions.
motivated.
IMVEs related to the convoy and what the risk of that was in their analysis. So that's what they provided me, asking for information on CFNCIU. It had almost nothing to do with what I asked for. So again, it's a complete obfuscation, smoke and mirrors, smoke grenade throw to just distract from what I'd asked for. And we're now a year into my request with a formal acknowledgement from the folks within ATIP saying that, yes, this information has been ordered to be provided to you. We can't explain why it has not been provided to you. And the second investigation has now been launched into where this information is and why I don't have access to it. Because somebody somewhere along the way here doesn't want me or anyone else to see this, because I imagine it's pretty damaging. And even if it needs to be redacted, I want to know what the fuck happened. And just give me the paperwork, let me read it, expose the people that were involved. And if you were a pilot, if you were a comms researcher, signaler, whatever, try to get ahead of this and come out and say what happened and who asked you to do it, because eventually this is going to come out.
I love it. Brian, just because we're a podcast that is heavily reliant on my kid's schedule, we're going to have to make this a 2-part episode.
No problem, sir.
Because I want to get into the ATIPs, because I know you got a lot more juicy details, and I want to keep this conversation going, because what you're saying here is huge. And I know we're having a casual conversation, but this is the type of stuff that I never really imagined I'd be covering on my show, but here we are, right? And there's no media outlets that are really covering the really dirty little secrets that are going on. And it just seems like there's a never-ending cascade of transgressions and
that's a very polite way of putting
it. Crimes
yeah, exactly.
that are just happening with impunity, and it makes I'm trying to keep my emotions in check here, but it angers me. It's just, put it bluntly. So Brian, I appreciate you coming on the show and being honest and showing a lot of candor here to shine a light on some of the nasty little things that have been going on from your perspective in the Canadian government. And we'll definitely have to take this back up soon and make this a double episode, because there's a lot more here.
Appreciate it.
So folks, you're going to want to tune into episode 2 of this, because we're not done with this topic. And Brian, thanks so much for sharing your insights, and we'll have to get you back on in
Thank you for having me. I love it. You guys,
awesome,
you're doing great. You're doing God's work here, bud.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And folks, don't forget, train hard, fight easy. See you on the next one. Peace.
Cheers.